Hello everybody, welcome back to Sam and Ham. This is Ham, and today we're going to be doing part 2 of Kibblestasty's generic spells. Part 1's on screen. If you haven't seen that, I'd say go watch that first and then come back to this. Today we're going to be going to look over Force, Lightning, Thunder, and Poison spells, and we're going to be starting off here with Force. We move on to Force damage. Force is generally considered the best damage type, because only one creature is immune to it, and none resist it to the best of my knowledge. I think the two biggest spells that use it, top of my head, would be obviously Eldritch Blast and Magic Missile. So let's see where Kibblestasty takes a couple of these. First up is Aether Lance. It's a 3rd level evocation spell for sorcerers and wizards. It takes an action. It's a 30-foot line. Gather raw aether in your hand and expel it in a lance of raw energy. Raw power. Each creature in the line takes 8d4 force damage. On my first read, I just assumed this was worse Lightning Bolt because 8d4 is less than 8d6. Duh. However, after thinking about it for more than a second, I realized that it doesn't have the line, make a dexterity saving throw. This is no save? That's kind of nutty. I know that's how Magic Missile works, I just never would have thought to see an upcasted version of it. So if we just wanted to do some quick math here, Magic Missile does a d4 plus 1 per crystal. If you were to upcast at the 3rd level, you'd be shooting out 5 crystals. D4 plus 1 is average to 3.5 damage. 3.5 times 5 would be 17.5 damage on average. Meanwhile, Aether Lance does 8d4. D4 is average to 2.5, so 2.5 times 8 comes up to about 20 damage. So really, it's not a whole lot more damage than an upcast Magic Missile, though it is AoE. In a straight line. And generally, when you upcasting shouldn't be as efficient as just casting a higher level spell, because I mean, if you upcast Burning Hands, it's not as good as Fireball, obviously. So my gut reaction was to say 8d4 force damage unblockable would be too overpowered, but honestly, now that I think about it, I think it's okay. I think this one gets a pass, as unusual as it is. Next up, Aether Storm. 5th level evocation for sorcerers and wizards. Action, 120-foot range. Concentration, up to a minute. You conjure a storm of aether erupting from a point of your choice within range. The aether storm fills a 10-foot radius, 40-foot high cylinder centered on a point. When the storm appears, each creature within the area takes 8d4 force damage. A creature takes 1d4 force damage for every 5 feet they move through the storm, and if a creature ends their turn within the aether storm, they take 8d4 force damage. On your turn, you can move the storm 10 feet in any direction as a bonus action. So I had just mentioned in the last spell that 8d4 force damage averaged about 20 damage. Now, with a 5th level spell, you can do around 20 damage to everyone in a giant AoE, potentially multiple turns in a row. This one's definitely going to be really hard to balance. Having a giant AoE that can potentially hit somebody multiple turns in a row with unblockable damage is difficult to balance, but the damage numbers are... The 8d4 looks big, but at that level, it's really not. 20 damage isn't nothing, but for a 5th level spell slot, you can usually get a lot farther. I mean, if you just want to do burst damage, you could do... Cone of Cold's going to do almost double damage of this. Creatures do take a d4 of force damage for every 5 feet they move through the storm, which is kind of cool, but with a 10-foot radius, that's not a whole lot. And it's not difficult to rain anything, so they can really just move. Unless you're able to use this one in a really good choke point, or somewhere where... Or maybe you have a fighter grappling an opponent and they're not able to move, then I could see this spell getting really disgusting. As it is, I don't think I would have made this spell, but it seems mostly fine. I don't think it's too grossly unbalanced. But it gets a little hard to balance spells once you start getting up to these higher levels. Then again, if you compare this thing to Animate Objects, I think the Animate Object's going to be doing a lot more damage. Next up, Field of Stars, another 5th level spell. It's for the Druid, Sorcerer, Wizard, or the Occultist. Action, it's got a range of 60 feet around you. Concentration for up to a minute. You cause 5 star-like motes of light to spring forth at points you can see within range. Each mote of light must be at least 10 feet from another mote of light. Each mote of light sheds bright light in a 10-foot radius and dim light for another 10 feet. If a creature moves within 5 feet of a mote or ends their turn within 5 feet of one, the mote explodes in a brilliant light, dealing 4d12 radiant damage to all creatures within 5 feet of the mote before fading away. For the duration of the spell, while you have any motes of light remaining, as an action you can rearrange the moving motes, placing them anywhere you want within range. This movement does not cause them to detonate. I think the spell's really cool, and I understand he's kind of going with a theme here for the 4 spells not requiring saves. I think the like area of effect on this one is super interesting. It's like really reminds me of Firestorm is a 7th level spell, where you can kind of make like an intricate AoE to try to like move it around your allies. Super cool. And I like that they all shine light. This can be really useful if you're in the dark and your allies are humans. But then again, if you have 5th level spells and you don't have another solution for that, you're kind of getting into trouble as it is. Damage is pretty low. 4 D12s is not a ton of damage at this level. D12 averages out to 6.5 damage. 4 times that is 25. I think my biggest gripe with this one is that if you're not playing on a map, I think it'd be really hard to say exactly where you place each one. I think if you're playing Theater of the Mind, it could be really difficult to do it. Really difficult to really visualize where everything is. As it is, I like this spell, but I don't think I could see it ever really going live because of how difficult it would be to see where everything is. Seeking Orb, it's a 2nd level spell. Sorcerer Wizard, action, range of 5 feet, concentration up to a minute. You create a tiny orb of pure arcane energy that hovers in range and designate a target within 120 feet. For the duration of the spell, at the end of each of your turns, the orb will move 30 feet directly towards the creature. If the orb reaches the target, it will detonate for 64 force damage to the target and ending the spell. If the orb does not reach the target before the spell ends, it fades away without dealing damage. That's cool. I like that. That feels like something straight out of like Terraria or a video game of some sort. 64 force damage comes out to 15. 15 damage is actually quite a bit at 2nd level. Comparing it to a couple of other spells, I'd say one of the most classic damage dealing spells at this level is Scorching Ray or Agonizer Scorcher. Scorching Ray would do more damage if all of them hit, but it's kind of unlikely to have all 3 hit, whereas this one doesn't even allow a save on hit. Agonizer Scorcher allows for a dexterity saving throw and does less damage. Obviously, this one has the little bit of downside of 1, requiring concentration. 2, if the creature is more than 30 feet away, then it potentially might not even hit him this turn. Which, that is obvious downside, but a lot of combat takes place within 30 feet of the party. And the other upside of having range potentially up to 120 feet, it's pretty strong. And, I mean, if things line up, this spell could go up to 300 feet if the enemy runs away. At just the right speed, obviously, but... cool as this one is, I don't think I would really allow this one. Maybe lower the damage to 44 or allow for a save, and then it'd be fine. But as it is, the damage is just a little too strong compared to some of the other existing options. Force Bolt, we got a cantrip. Just for Sorcerer. Interesting. It's an action, 120-foot range. You hurl a mote of arcane energy at a creature or object within range. Make a ranged spell attack against the target. On a hit, the target takes 2d4 force damage. Increases by 2d4 at the average cantrip levels. Seems cool. 2d4 is close to a d8. It's just a little bit more consistent. It's kind of like using a great sword versus a great axe. So honestly, this thing even might just be a little bit weak compared to, say, Ray of Frost that does a d8 of damage and adds the slow effect. But when you add in the fact that this thing's a little bit more consistent, that's probably where the balancing is. Seems boring but balanced. I'd say it's a pass. Force Blade, a 4th level spell. It's a bonus action with a range of self and concentration up to a minute. You create an oversized blade of pure scintillating force energy in your hand. For the duration of the spell, as an action, you can sweep the blade through a target within reach, dealing 2d12 force damage. This one's pretty interesting. Having repeatable damage that has no save, no blocking, no nothing, is pretty strong. But it's only for sorcerers and wizards, not exactly the most notorious melee classes. It takes concentration. I'm thinking, yeah, there could be a Blade Singer that might want to abuse this, but I think most Blade Singers would probably go for like Shadow Blade or Haste, probably before they take Force Blade. I'm kind of struggling to see who would really want to take this spell, because like I said, Blade Singers already have a few spells competing for their concentration, and this thing's damage is not quite high enough in my opinion to really butt those out. But if you're not one of those, Well, then you've probably also still got some of them competing for concentration. And the damage isn't exactly that insane. For 4th level spell, 2d12 force damage, that's about 12-13 damage a turn. It's not nothing, but it's not a lot. Best option I can see here is if you are a Blade Singer who is up against an enemy with super high AC that you're having trouble hitting. Or for some reason it's resisting all the other damages that you have, and you keep this as a backup option to really try to get through it. Seems balanced, if a bit weak. Seems fine. Stardust, 2nd level evocation. Sorcerer Wizard, action, 15-foot cone from the self. Instantaneous. Evokes a burst of brilliant force energy, sweeping out in a 15-foot... Oh, let's see, hey, there's a typo. The range says cone, this says cube. Either way, creatures in the radius take 3d4 force damage, and the next attack roll made against them before the start of your next turn has advantage. The way I see this one is the damage is pretty piddly, but the AoE buff, potentially giving most of your party advantage on attack rolls, that's strong. I don't think it's too strong, though. I definitely think D&D 5th edition is lacking in a few ways to let you buff your friends that don't require concentration. Yeah, this just kind of feels like a mixture of Guiding Bolt and Burning Hands. I don't think it's too strong. It could be. If somebody made a really good argument for it, I'd be willing to listen. But I'm always a little bit more fan of, if something's going to be strong, at least it's helping out the entire party and not just you doing a ton of damage. So, yeah, I'd give this a pass any day of the week. Next, we're going to be moving on to Lightning. He leads in with a little disclaimer here, talking about the shocked status that he's essentially made here. It's a status that stuns the target until the start of their next turn, rather than the end of their next turn, like most stuns are, like stunning strikes. As he puts it, this effectively means that they cannot take reactions, is incapacitated, interrupting such effects such as concentration, and they automatically fail strength and dexterity saving throws, and attacks against them have advantage. He points out that is very powerful, though less powerful than stunning until the end of their turn, where they would lose an action and all that. So let's see just how powerful he makes them in some of these spells, yeah? First up, Crackle. 2nd level evocation, Druid, Occultist, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard. Another Warlock spell. Casting time of an action, range of 60 feet, with an instant duration. You create 3 arcs of lightning, striking targets in range. You can direct them at one target or several. Make a ranged spell attack for each arc. On a hit, the target takes a d12 of lightning damage. If 3 or more arcs hit a single target, they must make a con saving throw or become shocked, stunning them until the start of their next turn. That's cool. I like that. I don't think that's going to be too strong, because the likelihood of you hitting all 3 on the same guy is pretty low. This is most easily compared to Scorching Ray, because, 3 beams, 3 arcs of lightning, Scorching Ray doing 2d6 versus this d12, and this one just having that additional rider of 3. If 3 or more arcs hit a single guy, they must make a con save or become shocked. I don't see a problem with that. Scorching Ray is good, but it's not exactly like the most broken spell around. And this just having a little bit more upside is fine, compared to the fact that the d12 is so swingy damage-wise versus the 2d6. I'd call that a pretty even trade. And then the ability to upcast is actually super cool for this spell, because you get to make an additional arc. So then, if you shoot all 4 at the same guy, then you have a higher chance of actually hitting him and being able to get that stun off. And plus, even if you hit all 3 times, which isn't going to happen every time, even if you shoot somebody with a low AC, you're going to roll bad. Somebody's going to roll a 1. Always happens. They still get the chance of making a con saving throw. So, even though there is the potential of them being shocked, I don't see it happening often. And if it happens, then cool, you earned it. You got lucky. Easy pass. This is a fantastic spell. Next up, Lightning Tendril. 1st level spell. Warlock again. I see you. As well as, Druid, Occultist, Sorcerer, and Wizards. It's a bonus action with a range of 15 feet. Concentration up to a minute. Crackling beams of blue energy leap from your hands. For the duration of the spell, as an action, you can direct them to a creature within range, dealing a d12 of lightning damage to a creature. And this has a very long upcasting section, where when you cast it with 3rd or 4th level, you do 2d12 and the range is 30 feet. When you use a 5th or 6th, it's 3d12 and it's up to 60 feet. And when you use a 7th or higher, it's 4d12 at 120 feet. So first thing I notice here is that this feels pretty similar to Witch Bolt. Seems like a pretty direct upgrade to Witch Bolt, to be honest. And good, Witch Bolt is pretty terrible, honestly. And the next thing I noticed is that this spell can't miss again. It's interesting. D12 lightning damage isn't exactly high. It's nothing to write home about. You're basically spending a 1st level spell slot to get a cantrip that can't miss. Oh, and it takes your concentration. Oh, and it has a range of 15 feet. Oh, don't forget, if you lose concentration, you lose out on your spell slot. Seems goofy, but I'm always a fan of spells that you can really get some mileage out of at 1st level. Hell, I'm a fan of spells where you can get a lot of mileage out of it at any level. One thing I'm noticing, though, if you compare this to the spell we were looking at earlier, the Force Blade here, this one's just better than Force Blade. From what I can notice, Force Blade has the range of within your reach, which I feel like should probably be specialized or specified. Whereas this one, if you cast it with a 4th level spell slot, which is the same as the other one, it has the same duration, but they both cost a bonus action. If you use a 4th level spell slot, this one also does 2d12, it just has a range of 60 feet. Yeah, it does lightning damage rather than force, but how many people are that resistant to lightning? But yeah, I didn't think that. I thought that last one was kind of weak, and this one's not a lot stronger, a little bit stronger, especially with the variability. The fact that one can only be a 4th level spell slot, whereas this one can be, well, you know, it has to be at least 4th level. This one can be at least the 1st level if you really have nothing left at the end of the day. I don't see this one being picked very often if it was allowed, but there are plenty of unpopular spells as it is. I'd allow it. Next up, Jumping Bolt. It's a 4th level evocation spell for sorcerers and wizards. It has an action. Casting type of an action, has a range of 60 feet, instant duration. You release an arc of lightning at a creature within range. Make a ranged spell attack roll against the target. On a hit, the target takes 4d12 lightning damage, and you can cause the spell to jump to another target within 20 feet of the first target, making a new attack roll for each target. The spell cannot hit the same target twice, or jump to a target out of the spell's range, which again, 60 feet. The spell can jump to a maximum of 5 times. On a miss, the target takes half as much damage, and the spell does not jump to a new target. So this one's obviously inspired by, like, the idea of Chain Lightning. It took me a while to realize that Chain Lightning doesn't do this in 5th edition. I, quite frankly, like that. I really like the idea of, you know, bouncing between targets. It's super cool. I've had a ton of fun with it in different games and RPGs. I like this kind of pseudo save thing they've got going on. Like how on a miss they still take half damage, which is normally what happens if they like succeed on their dex saving throw, but this is an attack roll. That's cool, it's interesting. I feel like that's a mechanic that could definitely see some more use in other projects. But yeah, I think the spell is honestly maybe a little bit on the low damage side. 4d12 is pretty good, but it's not insane. For just easy math comparison, 4d12 is similar to 8d6 because double the amount of dice, but half the number of sides on each dice. So you kind of have something similar to damage to a lightning bolt, but you are able to be a little bit more picky and choosy about who it hits. Very cool design. I'd say this one's super awesome. I'd really like it. And again, I like Chain Lightning. The actual Chain Lightning doesn't feel like Chain Lightning. Next up's Electrocute. It's a 3rd level spell, which is interesting because you've already got a 3rd level spell competing for your lightning damage, so let's see what it does. It's for Sorcerer Wizard, action, 60 feet range, instant duration. A massive arc of lightning runs from your hand to a target you can see within range. The target must make a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, the target takes 4d12 lightning damage and is stunned until the start of your next turn. Successful save, the target takes half as much damage and isn't stunned. So, kind of like what I had mentioned with the last spell, you can kind of, for quick, easy math, half the dice size, double the amount of dice. Basically 8d6 damage. But it's a lot more swingy because of the way averages work, you know, just as likely to end up with 48 damage as you are 4. I definitely think this one's a strong one because, well, doing pretty much the same amount of damage as Lightning Bolt is already a lot of damage. And potentially adding a stun on top of that is really strong. However, this thing has 2 saving graces. One, it's not AoE like Lightning Bolt is, which can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. I think the AoE lightning bolt is easy enough to aim that it's never really been an issue. In my games, we're pretty fair about saying, I'm going to just position myself 10 feet to the right and then shoot my lightning bolt through that guy at that angle so that it doesn't hit the fighter. I can see if you have like a really picky DM who gives you a lot of like straight corridors that, lightning bolt's AoE is being a really big downside, but doesn't come up a ton in my games or any games I've ever been in, so I'd call the AoE an upside. The other big downside for Electrocute here is that it uses Constitution as its saving throw, which is kind of rough. Constitution is, for most monsters, their highest stat. Nobody's out here dumping the Constitution stat. No monsters have really garbage Constitutions. I mean, heck, look at the average Goblin. When even your Goblin that you're going to fight level 1 has +0 to Constitution. No negatives here. And it only gets worse as you level up. So I'd say this one's probably a little bit pushed, but I don't really think there's too much. I'm a little surprised that he went with the stunned until the start of your next turn, rather than the shocked condition that he was talking about up here. Personally, that's probably what I would have done, but I think it's okay enough. This one's a little bit iffy from me, but I think it'd probably get the pass. One more additional upside before we move on is that, as you see, is that upcasting gives you an extra d12 of damage, rather than an extra d6 like you would get for Lightning Bolt, so actually pretty good for upcasting. And the last lightning spell we're going to be looking at today is Skyburst. 5th level spell for Druid, Sorcerers, Wizards. 5 bolts of lightning strike 5 points of your choice that you can see within range. Each point must be at least 10 feet from all the other selected points. Each creature within 5 feet of those points must make a dexterity saving throw. A creature takes 4d12 damage on a failed save or half as much on a successful one. So this one is kind of similar to that. So this one's kind of similar to the Field of Stars that we were talking about earlier, where you have to have them so far apart. I think this one's going to be a little bit easier to manage just because it's instant and it's not concentration, so you don't got to worry about over multiple turns or anything. So this one seems pretty fine. So the fact that you have to space all these lightning strikes out means that you can't just throw them all at one guy and just try to one-shot him. So this is just like a really targeted AoE. I think that's cool. I see no problems with it. The damage hasn't gone up at all since the 3rd level spell we just talked about before. You just get a little bit more AoE to it. I'd say this one's just fine. It's cool. Up next, we're moving on to Thunder spells. Echoing Lance is a 4th level evocation for Sorcerers, Wizards, and Occultists. It's an action. It's got a range of 60 feet and it takes concentration up to a minute. You make a target burst of intense sonic energy at a target within range. The target must make a Constitution saving throw, and on a failure, take 3d8 thunder damage and be stunned for the duration of the intense sound. On a successful save, the target takes half as much damage as not saved. At the end of each of its turn, the target can make another Constitution saving throw. On a success, the spell ends for the target, and on a failure, they take an additional d8 of thunder damage from the echoes within their mind. Stunned is a very strong condition. But this is a 4th level spell, and the damage is, well, quite frankly, pretty pitiful. And it's a single target spell, so I think this makes for great single target crowd control. Yeah, I mean, think about it. I mean, Polymorph is the same level spell, same duration, same save, so I really think this one's fine. Good spell. I think this one should definitely be included. Though I gotta say, Thunder is definitely one of my, probably not my favorite damage types, so well, we'll see. Maybe there's a couple here that'll make me change my mind. I see something over here that looks pretty interesting. Next up, we got Sonic Shriek. It's a 5th level evocation for Sorcerers, Wizards, and Occultists. It's an action in a 120-foot cone. The duration is instantaneous. Each creature in this cone must make a Constitution saving throw, and on a failed save, they take 68 damage. And if they're within 60 feet of you... Oh, okay, so on a failed save, they take 68 damage if they're within 60 feet of you, or 3d8 if they're farther than 60 feet away. So they take 68 if they're within 60 feet of you. If they're farther out than that, they take 3d8. I think that's super cool, actually. And they take half damage on a successful save. I mean, if you just want to try to compare this one to Cone of Cold, it's 5th level cone spell. If you just compare the 60 feet cone here, which is 68, it just straight up does less damage than Cone of Cold. The only upside to this one is the fact that if they're over 60 feet away, you can still have something. But I feel like most people have better options for long-range combat than this, so it honestly seems just a little bit weak, other than the fact that Thunder is a very not resisted damage type, so otherwise, Yeah, seems like a fine spell. Thunder Pulse, 3rd level spell. Sorcerer Wizard. It's an action, 15-foot cone, concentration up to a minute. You gather up the sonic energy and expel in a shockwave for the duration. Until the spell ends, you can use an action to emit a shockwave in a 15-foot cone. Each creature in that area must make a con saving throw or take 3d8 thunder damage and be knocked 10 feet away from you on a failed save, or half as much on a successful one and is not knocked back. Gotta say, not a huge fan of this one. I don't think Dragon's Breath is anybody's biggest spell. I mean, it's just awful action economy-wise. If you lose it's short range, it's concentration, so if you're in the short range and get hit, you lose your spell. I think it's fine, because depending on your DM, depending on your campaign, this type of spell you can get a lot of mileage out of it. For 1/3 level spell, if you keep this up for 3 rounds, and if you're in the kind of campaign where you need to make every spell slot count, you need to get as much mileage out of every single spell slot because your DM likes the gritty realism where you have to rest for a week, this spell's going to be great. Because you can use this, an entire fight, you can potentially use this one spell and get a ton of mileage out of it. Because 3d8 in a cone, even if it's a short range one, is going to be more damage than just using a cantrip. However, if you're not in that kind of campaign, and you're in the kind of campaign where you're not going to go through all your spell slots in a day, usually, this spell's going to kind of suck. Instead of doing this, just use Fireball. So so this one, it has its niche in those gritty realism campaigns where you gotta make spell slots count, but otherwise I think it's kind of bad. I think that the knocking them back is because a 10-foot knockback isn't awful, but if you want to keep using this, now you've got to go chase down the guy. Like a knockback is useful when a guy has made it to you once. If he's going to keep coming at you, you need to run farther away and stop using this spell, because 15-foot cone is not far enough away. Also, you got to worry about, now if you have people in melee with you, it's a whole thing. So, I don't know. Not my favorite spell, but just because it's not mine, doesn't mean it's not anybody's, so generally I'm going to default to allowing a spell if it's on the weaker end, just because off chance somebody likes it. So, yeah, I'd allow this one in a heartbeat, because I don't think anybody's breaking the game with this one. Thunder Punch! I like those words. 1st level evocation for a sorcerer or wizard. It's an action, a touch spell, instant speed. You charge your hand or similar appendage with thunder power. Make a melee spell attack against the target. On a hit, they take 3d8 thunder damage and are knocked 10 feet away from you. Sick. Love it. Do I think it's good? I have no idea. I don't think so. 3d8 damage is fine. That's the amount of damage you'd get out of Chromatic Sphere, but this one's melee. But it gives you the knockback. You don't have to get the expensive component. I'd love to see a wizard use this. I really like the idea of a melee caster, so I would run this one in a heartbeat. I think this one's super cool. Just like the Stone Fist here. Just like this one. That one is just better this, my opinion. So anyway, yeah, love it. Great. Gotta say, of the Thunder spells, this is the only one that I would personally want to take on any of my characters. But, I mean, I don't think there's anything too bad about any of them, so let's move on to Poison here. Poison, Bad Blood. It's a 1st level necromancy spell. Cool. For druids, warlocks, or wizards. No sorcerers, surprisingly. Interesting. It's got a casting time of an action, range of 60 feet, and concentration up for a minute. Targeting a creature you can see within range, you attempt to corrupt its blood. Creatures without blood are immune to this effect. Target must make a Constitution saving throw, and on a failure, they take a d12 of damage and become poisoned for the duration. At the end of each of its turns, the target can make another Constitution saving throw. On a success, the spell ends for the target, but on a failure, they take an additional d4 poison damage as the poison continues to ravage them. And, cool thing, if you upcast it, instead of just making it stronger, it makes it target more people. That's cool. This actually reminds me a lot of how I did Blood Boil for my Death Knight class I've made. The review is on the channel. Link on screen now. But super cool. Poisoned is a pretty good condition. Let's pull that up real quick. As you can see, the poison condition gives them disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. So it basically just keeps them from attacking you very well. Poisoned just sounds cooler than that. This one seems fine to me. The damage is pretty darn low. You get some actually good utility. And quite frankly, I'm a sucker for some good necromancy. I don't think this game has enough good, debilitating necromancy abilities as it is. This just reminds me of, Ray of Sickness and stuff, so very cool. Definitely makes for... this would probably be one top choices for a Necromancer at level 1. We're going to move down, look at another first level Necromancy, Nauseating Poison. It's for Druids, Warlocks, and Wizards. No Sorcerer again. Poor, sad Sorcerer boys. Bonus action casting time range itself lasts for a round. You shroud your hand, a weapon you are holding, or a natural weapon in a dark Icarus miasma. I like the words they use. After casting a spell, if you make a successful melee spell attack, unarmed strike, or a melee weapon attack, the target takes an additional d12 of poison damage and must make a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, they become poisoned until the end of your next turn. The spell ends after dealing damage or at the start of your next turn, whichever occurs first. So this is a smite that doesn't take concentration. Very cool. So I thought about that a little bit. The smite spells with paladins, how it takes concentration, and it's a little bit rough to use if you're trying to concentrate on anything else. Not that paladins have a ton to concentrate on, but it really limits your options. I think this is a really good way to do it. This does not take your concentration, so you can keep concentrating on something, but you gotta use it now. If you miss, you are out of luck. There's no saving it for next turn. You're just at that spell slot. I'd say if this spell had one flaw, it's that it's awkwardly worded, specifically because he wants it to be used this way. Because everybody's heard, or at least a lot of people have, about whether or not a paladin can smite with his fist. I believe its rules is written that they can't, but even the creators of the game basically said that's more for flavor reasons than for balance. It's not like people punching people is really, it's not like a paladin punching people is really going to throw off balance. You can tell he really wanted to make sure that you can use this spell with anything. Punch him, tentacle him if you have a tentacle for any reason, melee him. Doesn't matter. You're cool. But it just comes out as a little bit awkward wording. Like, this is such a simple effect, it feels like it should be a 2-sentence spell, but it's not. I'm not trying to hold anything up against Kibbles, this is less criticism of the spell and more criticism of the way spells are worded in general, so. A great spell, I'd love it. This is also just a great spell for any kind of melee-based warlock or wizard. I can definitely see Hexblades, Blade Singers wanting to pick this up just for... Like, I imagine the 2 first-level spells that a Blade Singer would have prepared are Nauseating Poison here and Shield, just depending on whether or not you want to make those first-level spell slots into AC or damage. Druids, much as I'd love to see it used on them, I don't see it happening. Druids aren't exactly known for, they shillelagh, or shillelagh, however you pronounce that, but don't see them. Moving on, we got Poison Dart, Warlocks and Wizards. Kibbles, man, they're poisonous sorcerers, man. You can't just forget about them. But, like we said before, I'm just joking. I know he said not to pay too much attention about what classes get what. It's an action to cast, it's 60-foot range, instant speed. You conjure a dart of pure poison, as opposed to off-brand poison, and hurl it at a creature you can see within range. Make a ranged spell attack. On a hit, they take 3d12 poison damage and must pass a Constitution saving throw or become poisoned until the start of your next turn. Great spell. I don't think he worded that quite right. Because I believe the way it should say is, on a hit, the target takes 3d12 poison damage, and then must make a Constitution saving throw. On a failed save, they are poisoned until the start of their next turn. This is one of those situations where the wording is very clear. I know what he's saying. It's just not the way they've worded it in the past. So, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I don't know. Kind of hard to tell. Interesting to think about, though. So, if you want to follow in line with tradition, that's not the correct way to do it. But I can tell exactly what he means, so... As for the balance of this spell, it's risky. Easiest thing to compare this to is Scorching Ray. Scorching Ray does 2d6 on each ray, which there's 3 rays, gives you a total of 66 damage if you hit all 3. 66 is roughly, comparable to 3d12. So, whereas kind of the bonus of... But then again, this one maxes out at 36 damage and minimums out at 3, so you can get really lucky or you can get really unlucky. All the eggs in one basket for this spell, so it's fine. I don't think I'd ever take it unless I was trying to do like a poisonous build. But if I was, I'd probably be a sorcerer, which isn't on the spell list. Moving on. Poison Puff, 4th level transmutation, druid, occultist, warlock, wizard. Where? Ah! Action! 30-foot cone! Instantaneous duration. You exhale a cloud of poison that quickly and magically expands to fill a 30-foot cone. Creatures in that area must make a Constitution saving throw. On a failure, take 4d12 poison damage and become poisoned until the start of your next turn. On a success, the target takes half as much damage and is not poisoned. The area is lightly obscured until the start of your next turn, and any creature that ends their turn within the area takes 2d4 poison damage. That's awesome. The spell seems great. I love... Obscuring the battlefield is super cool. It reminds me a little bit of Pathfinder, system I loved, where Fog Cloud was one of the best spells you could have as a first level spell at higher levels. Because, for basically lack of a better term, first level spells fall off hard in 3.5 and Pathfinder because their saves don't go up as like you do. Pathfinder, you have different saves for different spell levels, made for a little bit complicated, but basically your first level spells really started to fall off unless they had, if they required any kind of a save. So that made Fog Cloud one of the best spells in the game. And Fog Cloud kind of sucks in 5th edition. It's fine, it does its job, but it's just not, it's not as good as it used to be. And so because of that, the rules for obscured, lightly obscured versus heavily obscured might not be as used in every campaign. Now, Lord knows I don't use it often enough, so I think the fact that this does it, and it's not concentration, awesome. That's the other thing. I definitely love when 5th edition gives anybody, really, a chance to debuff or buff that doesn't require concentration, because I just think it's cool. When you're trying to play a really supporty character and you can only have one buff going at a time, it definitely feels kind of bad. So I could see this one definitely being on a wizard, like he's concentrating on maybe haste for the fighter, and he uses this to, you know, maybe give some, to obscure the enemy so he can't see somebody farther away. I don't know. Pretty cool spell. I like it. Stinging Swarm. It's a 4th level conjuration for occultists, warlocks, and wizards. It's an action to cast at 60-foot range and concentration up to a minute. You conjure a magical swarm of flying insects within range, which lasts for the duration. For the duration of the spell, the swarm is magically replenishing and cannot be destroyed. As a bonus action, you can direct the swarm to move up to 30 feet. If the swarm enters another creature's space, it stops and swarms them, stinging repeatedly. The creature takes 2d4 piercing damage and must make a Constitution saving throw, taking 2d12 poison damage on a failure. Okay, so the first thing I'm noticing is he doesn't give a size for the size of the swarm. I don't know if he's trying to say like a 5-foot cube or like a 10-foot cube. I'm just looking through the bestiary. Most of them are medium swarms, so I'd have to assume he assumes it's going to be a 5-foot one, but I think it'd be good to specify here that moving it up to 30 feet, if it enters another creature space, it stops and swarms them, so it isn't able to like just move through a bunch of creatures and get all of them. This one seems okay. I think one thing here that's kind of a little bit cool is that it does do magical piercing damage, which very rarely resisted, and you can't block that, it seems. They just take that damage. They get a con save to negate the poison damage, but that's about it. If you made the change to make it so you can tell exactly how big the swarm is, or specify a little bit more there, I think this one could be good. As it is, probably I wouldn't let it in my campaign, but that's just me. Another spell I'd like to compare this to before we move on is Flaming Sphere, a 2nd level spell, which, of course, you can upcast. If you cast Flaming Sphere with a 4th level spell slot, it does 4d6 of fire damage if they've failed their dexterity saving throw. So 4d6 is pretty comparable to 2d12, so, or at least they maximize out at the same amount. So I'd say they're pretty comparable. So damage-wise, I think this spell is pretty on point. Spider Bite's a 3rd level spell for druids, occultists, warlocks, and wizards. Alright, ripped the band-aid off. Does he let any... Nope, no sorcerers the rest of the time. Okay, just double checking. So Spider Bite's for druids, warlocks, wizards, and occultists. It's an action to cast, it's a range of touch, and it's an instant duration. You prick a target with a fang of magical venom. So you make a melee spell attack against a creature within reach. On hit, they take 4d12 damage, roughly comparable to the 8d6 of Fireball. Then they have to make a Constitution saving throw. If they fail, they're poisoned for up to a minute. At the end of each of their turns, they can repeat the Constitution saving throw to negate the poison. If you miss the melee spell attack roll, you can concentrate as if concentrating on a spell to maintain the attack for another attempt until the end of your next turn. So, I see why he says it like that, because if you just put concentration in the spell duration, then the poison would still probably require the concentration just for ease of use. Definitely like a little cool backup here. I definitely could see the minute-long, potentially, poison being a little rough if you have a bad guy with a pretty low constitution, but they have to make an attack roll, and then the enemy has to fail a constitution saving throw. At that point, you're asking for a bad guy to just lose. I'd say it seems like a pretty fair spell. I am a little leery at that potential minute of poison, but I think it's definitely fine. The fact that they have to, again, get hit first, then make the save, I think that's enough to warrant, and it's single target and a touch spell, whereas you could just cast Fireball. This seems like enough risk to be worth the reward. The last one here, Vicious Vapors, 2nd level transmutation, Druids, Warlocks, and Wizards. Action casting time, it's got a range of 60 feet, and you can concentration for up for a minute. And it lasts for concentration up to a minute. You fill the air with a poisonous vapors in a cube 5 feet on each side. A creature must make a constitution saving throw when it enters the spell's area for the first time, or starts its turn there. On a failed save, they take a d12 of poison damage and become poisoned until the end of their next turn. On a successful save, they take half as much damage and are not poisoned. You can move the cloud up to 20 feet as a bonus action during your turn. This seems pretty cool. Pretty easy to compare this one to Cloud of Daggers. Cloud of Daggers can't move, does do more damage at 4d4 versus d12, but this one gives you the added bonus of the poison. So this one does give the target a Constitution saving throw to avoid the poison, which Cloud of Daggers just does the damage. So just being able to move it definitely makes it handy. I can see this one being super useful for choke points, or, I mean, worst case scenario, you just have that fart cloud, for lack of a better word, follow around somebody, as long as they don't move more than 20 feet a turn. So I also do like that it's not good at chasing enemies that are running away. Kind of cool. So, but with that, we come to the end of all this. All this down here are his patrons. I'd say 90% of the spells in here were great, and the other 10% probably just have a few minor wording things. A couple of them I said, you know, it seemed a little bit too strong, but for the most part, Kibblestasty has some of the highest quality of homebrew that I think you can look into. From what I've seen, I haven't read all of his stuff, so sorry if that's not 100% accurate, but from what I've read, Kibbles is definitely top percentage. With that, that's all I have for you guys today, so thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Links, of course, to the PDF are in the description, as well as the Reddit thread that it's from. So, everybody have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.